Please leave a comment where in the world you are listening from. My name is Luke. I am French. I am 26 years old, and I currently live in Australia, Brisbane, since May 2019. I met my girlfriend Mina, who is Japanese origin, 1 month after my arrival in Australia on a strawberry farm where we both work. We worked over there for several months until the health crisis hit the planet. So no more work on the farm. We have to find something else. At that time, we had two choices. Go back home and we split up, or stick together and try to get through this event on our own. Spoiler, we chose the second solution. We then decided to leave our seasonal job in the countryside to go into town, trying to find a new job. Bingo. Good news for me. An employer has agreed to hire me to work on a local Australian football team. This employer will be named Kathy. Anonymity requires. Kathy explains to me that I can work for the football team, but that currently, because of the health crisis, a containment will be mandatory, even if at this time Australia is rather spared compared to Europe. Anyway, I'm hired, but I'm going to have to wait until the lockdown passes and the football season resumes. So I explain that it tempts me, but that it will be tense for Mina and me to remain unemployed during the confinement because we have a rent to pay, food, etc. You should know that Kathy has a heart as big as Australia. Sensitive to our situation, she explains that she has a solution for us. She has a holiday home several kilometers from Brisbane that belonged to her father, who is now in a retirement home, where we could stay for free while confinement is in progress. At this time I do not believe it too much. I tell myself that there is something fishy, but in front of the situation. I agree, this is the best solution for us. We accepted this and moved to this house a few days later. Animal Crossing, Splatoon, MK. We enjoyed playing video games during this lockdown, aha. Everything is going well. We feel a little lonely because this house is isolated in the countryside. But apart from that we are well, we have a garden, etc. All this for free. I also point out that this house is like in the middle of nowhere. I just have a neighbor, John, who takes care of horses I've been friends with, and that's it. Other details that will have their importance. In this house, there is a main entrance door with a large fuzzy glass, so you can distinguish things through, and there is another wooden door behind the house that overlooks a veranda connected to the house. This house is a single story, so there are no floors, and to finish, no curtains at the window except in the bedroom. The context is given. The story begins now. 3 or 4 weeks after I moved in, Kathy calls me with good news. I can go to work. First day of work, everything goes smoothly. I like what I do, very good atmosphere, etc. The only problem is, we're still in Kathy's father's house, which is several miles from Brisbane, and I don't have a car, so I have an hour and a few trains to go, and the same one to come back. But like I said before, I have nothing to complain about. For the record, Mina was still looking for work. She wasn't as lucky as I was, so she was mostly at home while I'm working. Second day of work. Always at the top. 5 p.m. I'm about to finish my job when I get a call from Mina. She whispers, the voice trembling. And you have to know that we communicate in English both, and we are not necessarily bilingual, so sometimes we understand each other half. First second I feel something's wrong. Here I will switch from her point of view to give you a maximum of details. She was quiet playing Animal Crossing on the couch, when suddenly she saw a silhouette through the blurred window of the main entrance door. Too small and too wide for me, or even John. And she understands it very quickly. She stares at this figure that is now motionless facing the front door. It is at the moment when she tries to get up to gently walk away from the door that this guy begins to frantically knock on the door. Her heart is racing. She doesn't know what to do. She tries to be as discreet as possible, so this guy thinks that no one is there or will open it to him. She finally decides to hide in the wardrobe of the room, because it is the only room where we cannot see what is happening from the outside. Snuggling between the hangers and our clothes, and praying for him to let go, she suddenly remembers that there is a second door behind the house that is open, and she does not know if it is locked or not. Courageous, she decides to rush through the house to reach this door, and then during her run, she sees this guy sneaking past one of the windows of the kitchen. Conclusion, he goes around to check if there is a door at the back of the house. Panicked but already in her race, she decides to go to the end and try everything for the hole. She must close this door before he tries to open it. It is finally when she presses the latch that she hears the individual trying to push the door. Completely frightened, she goes back to hiding in this wardrobe, and that's when she calls me. As I said earlier, I struggled a little to understand what she was saying to me on the phone. Her voice trembled, etc. but I immediately tried to calm her down so that I could have clear information about what was going on. After a minute, I ask her to focus on her breathing and listen to me, she calmly describes to me what just happened. I switch to mode. I have to go home as soon as possible while making sure that she is the least in danger. I ask him to stay in that closet and call the police and call me back right away until I get home. Finally, she decided to stay on the phone with me, which is not the best solution. I admit she should have called the police, but I was in a state of total stress, and the fact of having her on the phone in continuous reassured me. I order an Uber, who must have found me super weird besides. I kept asking him to go faster, even to pay more. Aha! After a few minutes I am in my Uber, always with Mina on the phone. She explains to me that she can't hear anything anymore, no one knocking on the door or no one around the house. My entire career has been spent in emergency medicine, responding to 911 calls, and providing advanced life support for life-threatening illnesses and injuries. The calls we respond to range from inappropriate use of an ambulance to minutes away from death, and oftentimes it's already too late. This story in particular is going to be dark. I apologize in advance if there are people that read this story and are affected by the nature of this story. It is going to be graphic. I am not going to gloss over any details because the imagery is important. As awful as this story is, I want to make something good come from it. I want to use this story to preach a little and hope it finds someone somewhere and helps them ********. As stated above, this content may not be suitable for everyone, but again, I believe it to be important. It is going to be a long one, so set in, get comfortable, get a blanket or something warm to wrap yourself in. This is the one and only story I have a hard time sharing, and you will find out why. Over the last couple of days, I have been ecstatic to see the responses I have been getting from these stories. I never thought people would like them or respond to them in the way you all have. So I thank you for reading my stories and conversing with me in the comments. With all of that out of the way, this story is my Vietnam. I had been working for a couple of years as a paramedic after I graduated from school. The place I worked primarily was in the city, but our service area was the entire county, which is very rural. When you are in school, you go on ride-alongs. You practice your skills with your preceptors on patients, very similar to residency or internship. Your exposure to the job is what you get while on those ride-alongs. Sometimes you get seriously injured patients, and it's terrifying, because you sometimes don't always know what to do. You're still learning. But you have your preceptor at your back to protect you from any fuck-ups and guide you. Sometimes, though, you don't get lucky enough to experience some of these horrible things. To some, that may seem like a good thing, but it is important to experience these as it prepares you for a time when you're all alone. There are a couple terms we use called white could and black cloud. White cloud refers to a person, either student or professional, who never gets the exciting serious calls. The calls always seem to come when you are just getting off shift, or you left the area of where the call came in, and now another ambulance takes it, and this white cloud can follow this person for any length of time. Black cloud is the opposite. When I was in school, I was a white cloud. I got a few cardiac arrests, bad accidents, things like that, but nothing that ever really stood out as unique. So a couple years into my career, this white cloud is still kind of hanging over me. That's not to say I hadn't had bad calls before that. I have, but it's not the same. The day this story takes place is Christmas Eve. I worked from 7 a.m. Christmas Eve to 7 a.m. Christmas Day. From what I remember, the day was pretty slow. Most people are with their families, not going outside, getting into accidents or causing mischief. I was working with the charge medic at the time and a brand new EMT who was going through his FTO, field orientation process, was with us. A few of my co-workers had made a Christmas dinner that day, so we all had hot food to enjoy while we had to work and be away from our families. At our station, we had 2 ambulances there with 2 crews. Myself, my partner, and our FTO, and the other crew. When night comes, if a call comes into our station, the 2 crews just rotate calls so that we get to sleep a little bit more. It was around 11 p.m., and I was sitting in the recliner watching TV. A call came into our station that required us to respond out to the county. One of the guys on the other crew, who was a friend of mine, was asleep in the recliner next to me, so I took the call. The call was initially for a woman who had fallen and hit her head, but was conscious and breathing. Due to the nature of the injury, we responded emergent. It was probably about a 15-minute drive to get to the person's house. As we are getting close, dispatch informs us, now the point is not conscious but breathing. As we approach the residence, driving down the street where this little development is, there is flashing lights everywhere. Sheriff's deputies, police, fire department were all there, with some even blocking the entrance to the street. For just a simple head injury, we thought that was pretty weird, and it set a weird vibe for the call. One of the deputies saw us coming and moved his car, allowing us through. Once we got through, this part of the street ended in a cul-de-sac with houses all around it. People were standing on their front porches around looking at what was going on. We arrived at the address. There is a vehicle parked in the driveway, still running with officers all around. The driver's side door was open, and there was an officer standing there and looking like he was talking to someone sitting in the driver's seat. I walked up first with my partner and our EMT FTO behind me. As I approached the rear of the vehicle, I see there is definitely someone sitting inside. There is also a man, middle-aged, in plain clothes standing in front of the vehicles, his lower half lit up by the headlights. He has his hands in his pockets, and he is looking rather intently at the person in the vehicle. I walk up to the officer and get report from him. While the officer is telling me what is going on, I look at the person in the driver's seat. The person sitting in the driver's seat was a middle-aged woman, maybe mid-40s to 50s, sitting back with her head against the headrest, her arms hanging down by her side. I can visibly see her breathing, hear her moaning, but not talking. Her eyes are also closed. There is a bit of blood running down from her head, past her cheeks and down to her chin. There is also a small stream of blood coming from her nose. The officer tells me that she was inside with the family when she came outside to get something from the car. The officer says that the woman's husband, and gestures to the man standing in front of the car, came out to check on her because she was out here for a while. When the husband saw his wife bleeding, he figured she must have fallen or hit her head on something, so he called 911. The officer tells me the woman has not been responding to him. I attempt to speak to the woman. She does not answer me, but continues to moan. I perform a sternum rub to cause painful stimuli and hope to get some sort of reaction. No reaction. I ask the husband if she has been drinking tonight, or if she abuses any drugs that he knows of. He says that she has had a few glasses of wine, but no drug use. At this point I'm thinking she has a head injury and potentially a brain bleed, because she is not responding appropriately. I stand where the officer was standing in the driver's side door as I am performing my assessment. I can't see where the blood is coming from, so I figure she has a laceration or something in her hair that isn't visible. It's at this time that the officer comes up to me. He says, "We also found this in the driver's side door compartment." He produces a revolver. I look at the officer and look at the revolver. He looks at me and holds it out. I grab the revolver and flip out the cylinder, and at the same time thinking to myself, oh, fuck. In the cylinder is one brass casing, with the primer indented, meaning a round has been fired. With this new information, and based on the bleeding, I assumed the point had put the gun to her temple or something. The fact that she is still breathing and making noises leads me to assume that she missed, or the bullet miraculously bounced off if she held it at a weird angle. Due to the potential for significant head trauma, I decide that we need to place a cervical collar on the woman, in case of spinal injury as well. I ask one of the firefighters to grab a collar out of our ambulance. I open the back door of the vehicle and get in behind the woman, so I can hold her head stable, while the fireman places the collar on. It's only when I do this that I see what really is going on. As I slide in behind the point, I can see the back of her head. Something I will never be able to unsee. Looking at the back of her head, I see a grapefruit-sized hole. With my flashlight, I look at the hole, and it is almost empty, except for a large piece of skull that is floating on top of a blood and brain soup. I look up, and on the headliner of the vehicle is a 2-foot in diameter halo of blood and brain painted above her, with tiny pieces of skull stuck into the fabric. I look back at the hole. It is a chilly night, so I can see heat vapors coming out of the hole, similar to how you would be able to see your breath on a cold day. I look out the vehicle at my partner, and I say, "We need to go, now." Either the look on my face, or his sense caused him to peek inside the vehicle and see what I was seeing. His eyes grew wide, and all he said was, "Holy shit." Our EMT FTO quickly went to the ambulance and grabbed the stretcher and backboard. Up until this point, we were taking our time carefully getting her out of the vehicle, but now carefully and slowly turned into, just get her out of the vehicle. Our EMT also grabbed me a few large trauma dressings and gauze wrap. I placed the trauma dressing over the hole, and wrapped the ever-living shit out of it around her head so that when we moved her onto the stretcher, nothing would spill out. With the help of the fire department and police, we moved the woman onto the backboard and put her on the stretcher. The whole time, the husband has been standing at the front of the vehicle watching, not understanding what has happened. As we get the woman on the stretcher, he comes over, and I can see he now has tears on his face. He bends down, kisses her on the cheek, and says, "I love you." We quickly get the woman in the ambulance. Due to the woman's injury, her cerebrum, largest part of the brain, is almost completely gone, meaning she has no motor function, no muscle tone, and no cognitive abilities. Her brain stem, however, is still intact. The bullet missed it. The brain stem controls the body's autonomic functions like respiratory rate, heart rate, and blood pressure. Due to this, when we moved the woman to the stretcher, her tongue fell against the back of her oral airway, causing a blockage. I knew immediately this was going to happen, so I had my partner set up the intubation supplies for me. In the ambulance, I placed the laryngoscope, bladed device used in intubation, into the patient's mouth to move her jaw and tongue forward, opening her airway. I see the hole on the roof of the woman's mouth. I slide the endotracheal tube through the woman's vocal cords into her trachea. This gives us a secured airway, so we can ventilate the patient. My partner uses an intraosseous needle to obtain vascular access. Does the same thing as in 4, but it goes in the bone, and medication and fluids are absorbed by the bone marrow. I place the point on the cardiac monitor, check her blood pressure and oxygen. At the time I thought it was the strangest thing. Her blood pressure was actually good. Her heart rate was normal, her oxygen was good, and her cardiac rhythm was normal. We start transporting emergent to the hospital, and I give them a heads up activating the trauma team. After the call, we went back to the station to restock the ambulance and clean up. That's when I saw all the bits of bone and blood on my pants and shirt. Luckily, the charge medic let me go home and take a shower and put on a new pair of clothes. After I changed, I went back to work, and the rest of the shift was uneventful. I learned that the next morning around 9 a.m., the family had decided to remove life support, and the woman passed away. For many years after that call, I didn't notice a change. I kept doing what I do best, and never really thought I had been affected by it, until I realized I was. A couple of years ago, I had a bad relationship that made me start thinking about myself and how I am. It was something that was always there, but I never really thought anything about it. I just thought it was my personality and who I developed into as an adult. I realized how angry I always was. I was not a mean person, but very simple, stupid things would set me off, and I had a bad temper. I was very cynical of the world, still am, and what I thought was a stomach problem, I started thinking maybe it's anxiety. I decided that I want to figure out what caused me to be this way. I wanted to figure out why I think the way I do, why I act the way I do. So, I decided to go see a psychologist. After many months' visits, my psychologist came up with the PTSD diagnosis. I hated it at the time. I hated being categorized as someone with PTSD. It didn't make sense. I can handle anything, nothing bothers me, but during those visits as we conversed, the one thing that kept coming up was that call. I didn't realize how much it actually affected me, how much of a wall that I build to shut everyone out and not see who I really am, to protect myself. The more I thought about it, the more I came to realize that it probably makes sense. The reason I tell this story the way I do, with the graphic detail, is because I think everyone needs to understand in its entirety how mental health not only affects a single person, but everyone around them. Like I said, I am going to get preachy, so if you don't want to read past this, I understand, but I urge you to. This is something we talk about at work quite a lot, and there are several co-workers on the ambulance even now that I talk with about this stuff. One of the, if not number one cause of death in first responders is suicide. If you are someone who has thought about or attempted suicide in the past, you need to know that taking your life doesn't affect only you. You may think it will be better this way, but I assure you it will not. People often say how selfish suicide is, and it's true. Because once you are gone, you have no idea the amount of lives have been impacted by you. If you don't think this is true, or that no one will care, maybe you need to go back and reread my story, because I guarantee people care. I care. So find someone, anyone to just talk to, be honest, let them know how you are feeling. I know it's hard. It was for me, but it does get better. You just have to try. So if anyone you know has or does struggle with mental health issues, reach out. Just be an ear. You don't have to try and solve the problem, but just listen. If you listen, you just may hear something that can help save someone's life. And if you struggle with mental health issues and think there is no one for you to talk to, you're wrong. It can be a professional. It can be the person you consider a close friend or relative. If you feel like none of these options work for you, or that you are considering doing something dangerous, go to your local emergency room. Call 911, because that is what we are all here for. Police, fire, EMS, ER staff. People may not think of these people to call when you are having a mental emergency, but I can tell you firsthand that we deal with this a lot more than you think, and we are trained in how to deal with people in these situations. All of us, even if you don't know what to say. If you even just make the call, it will get things started, and hopefully you find the help you deserve. You can call from anywhere, anytime. They are available for anyone in suicidal crisis or emotional distress. There is always someone to talk to. A few months ago, I was staying in my partner's apartment for a few weeks by myself. I don't quite remember why I was out that late, but it was around 1 a.m. and I just got off transit. Only one other guy got off with me, and he was rather tall and walked briskly. I was ahead of him at first, but he quickly passed me because even though I have a quick stride, I'm pretty short for a guy. I don't normally live in that city, so I'm not sure why, but the streets were incredibly empty. I remember thinking that because there wasn't even a single car on the road. We were literally a 5-minute walk away from a major university, so it was very odd to not see a single person or car. The only lights on were streetlights. I've spent nights at my partner's place before, and I never remembered it ever being this dead. Anyways, I had walked down the street and was coming up to an intersection where I had to turn left. I noticed this guy standing around in front of the bank that was on that corner. The guy ahead of me walked by him with no problem and went straight. I was a bit wary, but didn't think much of him until I was about maybe a meter away, and he had sidestepped to be in front of me and held his arms wide open, grinning at me. I glanced in the direction of the guy who left the train with me, but he was across the street already. My heart was already pounding at this point, and I think I may have started to dissociate from the stress, because I can't remember what he looked like even though I remember looking directly at him. If this sounds like an overreaction, I have a history of multiple cases of CSA by different people and have PTSD among other mental illnesses I still struggle with. At the time I was falling back into my disordered eating again and was also underweight in addition to being short, so definitely not the person you'd expect to win in a fight, and I knew it. I remember being frozen for a moment, and then on instinct I very politely said, "No thank you," took a step to the right towards the street and tried to keep walking forward. He moved in front of me again, still with his arms wide open, expecting me to hug him, still grinning. For some reason, I repeated my polite refusal and sidestepped him again instead of running the opposite the direction. Luckily he let me pass, but I could hear him following me from a short distance. I was wondering what I could do in that moment. I couldn't fight him. There was no one around. If I tried to call someone, he was close enough to grab me, and I wasn't able to run very fast. Suddenly I hear his steps speed up into a sprint, and before I could react, he slowed down again. I walked a bit faster. He repeated the same thing over and over. I wondered if I should go a different path, so he doesn't know where I live. It wasn't the best idea since I didn't know the city well, and he probably knew it better than I did. I decided I knew I could find help in the lobby, at least compared to if I went somewhere else. He sprinted at me again, and I turned around and loudly asked him, "Do you need help?" I remember not feeling my body and feeling lightheaded from the anxiety. Despite how panicked I felt, my voice came out clearly and I sounded disdainful. I don't think I meant to sound like he was annoying and inconveniencing me, but that's how it came out. Then he spoke for the first time and responded, "No. Do you need help?" I didn't say anything to that and just turned back around and kept speed walking towards my partner's apartment building. He was still following, but now he was talking. I can't remember much of what he said. I was just focused on getting back without being assaulted. Eventually I heard him stop walking. I know I'm scary. I don't know why he said that. I took the opportunity to put more distance between us and kept speed walking. He didn't keep following though. He just kept saying, "I know I'm scary." He got louder and louder the further I got. I got to the door of the apartment building and looked back again. He was no longer in sight. I unlocked the door to the building and then ran up the stairs instead of taking the elevator. When I got into the apartment, I went straight to the window because the unit had a large window facing the street. I wanted to see if I could see him. Nothing. The streets were empty. I texted my partner about my experience, but he was already asleep and wouldn't see it. Luckily, I haven't seen that man again, and I hope I never will. I know California gives off the whole sunset and palm trees vibe, but I've never experienced the type of shit I have since moving here 3 years ago. While it's beautiful and I hope to get a house and be here for life, I've never been forced to take my rose-colored glasses off so quickly. This is the second run-in I've had with a creepy man that had me realizing that in an instant everything could change forever. This actually happened to me a few hours ago, and I'm still shaken up about it. Hopefully by sharing it, it will help me feel more at ease. I've recently started taking aerial silks classes, and I absolutely love it. This was my first time going on a Saturday. The area is a bit rural, especially with so many of the local businesses closed due to quarantine, but it didn't strike me as dangerous by any means. Anyway, as I'm leaving my second class ever at this location, I notice a guy walking past. He's wearing all black, but nothing about him just screams danger. I'm talking to my husband on the phone, trying to decide if I want to go jog on the beach, or if I want to just join him at home, since he's off early for the first Saturday in months. We wrap up the conversation, and I decide to just go to the grocery store, and then go home since my muscles are beginning to ache as well. Thankfully, I'm an avid reader of Let's Not Meet, and one of the main habits I've picked up from others' experiences is to lock your car door as soon as you get in. I forgot to mention that I did that as soon as I saw the guy in black walk by, but I waited for him to pass, so he didn't get offended. Going forward, I don't give a damn. I will lock my door immediately no matter who's nearby. So I'm looking up recipes on my phone, trying to compare what I have at home versus what I need to pick up. My endorphins are going after an awesome workout. It's a sunny day, my man's home early. I just feel good and in the moment. Until suddenly I get this feeling to look up. As I look up at my driver's side mirror, I see a black shirt and jacket move from laying flat against my car to standing up straight. I automatically know who that is, and I start my car yelling, "Let me get the fuck on, because I will run this motherfucker over if I have to." As I'm saying this, he's just standing at my window slowly lifting his finger. It seemed like he was trying to say something along the lines of, "Can I just talk to you for a minute?" But in reality, it looked like he was trying to phone home like E.T. As I was pulling out, I immediately called my husband, and as I'm trying to process what happened, I get this strong feeling in my gut that he was pulling on my car handle, but I had it locked, and that's what gathered my attention and made me look up. I consider myself to be a nice person and will try to give the benefit of the doubt to most people, but there's no denying his malicious intent. From walking past the first time, to seeing I'm still there, to being pressed against my car, to the weird ass, what I took as him being nervous he got caught, finger pointing, to the fact that as I was pulling off, he didn't look back at me or anything. He looked over into the building my class was in, then walked back behind the building as though it never happened. I know this is not as big as other experiences on this thread, but it still has me shaken up hours later. And I hate it because I genuinely enjoy this class, but I don't want to catch OL boy again, especially since every other class is at night. Only Saturdays is at midday. I'm trying not to think about what creepy people like him have in mind, or what their next steps are, but I can't help but wonder, and it terrifies me every time that one day if I get caught slipping, that could be the end of my story. I will say once I got home, I gave my husband the biggest and longest hug and prayed to God, thanking him for allowing me to just take this experience as a lesson learned, as well as expressing gratitude for being able to return home tonight. So creepy E.T. pointing ass motherfucker, let's not meet, because if I choose to continue attending my workout classes I'm going to have my knife and mace ready, so don't make the necessary occur. Bitch. Please always lock your car door as soon as you get in your car, and don't just linger around in your car, especially if you're in an unknown area. I've gotten a bit better about doing this, but let my guard down since it was midday, and the door to my aerial silks class was literally 300 FT away. Edit, typos. Edit. My apologies if any of my lingo is a bit offensive, as stated in a comment below. I made this 2 hours after the incident while I was 2 shots in. I did edit the word hood since that could be seen as a clear stereotype. I'm black, by the way. But I will leave everything as is so I don't alter the experience, since I hope, at the very least, it could be a cautionary tale for others. I did not call because I was so shaken up and just wanted to get home safely into my husband's arms, and they were closed yesterday, but I will call when they open in the next hour and notify them. I read stories like this all the time, and sometimes wonder, why wouldn't you call so-and-so? But now I understand how in the moment simple things like that can slip your mind, as well as you kind of block certain things out, because it's a bit of a traumatic situation. Thank you for your responses. Having others respond to my experience lets me know that this was indeed a scary situation, and I made the right choice by reacting quickly. English is not my first language, and I am writing on my phone, so I apologize in advance for any mistakes. This happened 3 years ago while my former relationship was ending. I was 27 years old. Me and my ex-boyfriend weren't living together anymore. We were separated for a few months, but not quite broken up yet. I had just found out from his twin brother that he was keeping me as a backup while having fun with other girls, so I decided to end things. It was my birthday. I was a bit emotional about this whole situation, so I decided to go to his place and end it properly face to face. I took an Uber and went to the other side of the town, very far away from where I live and in a not so friendly or safe for girls area. I got there, we talked and ended things on good terms, given the situation. Now it was time to call an Uber and go back home. This was happening in November, on a rainy night, at about 2 a.m. My ride came, I got in, and I was just looking out the window and thinking. After 5 minutes or so I noticed that my Uber driver was looking at me in the rearview mirror in every second when he could take his eyes off the road. I brushed it off. This wasn't the first time when it happened, and I was honestly pretty sad to care. But then I noticed that he slowed down. A lot. This was when I started to pay attention to my surroundings, but without giving him the sensation that I was doing so. I noticed that he was a thin and tall guy, 25 to 30 years old. He looked like he wasn't taking very good care of himself, and his car was actually pretty dirty. I was just hoping to get home safe and faster at this point. Then, out of nowhere, he started talking. "Driver, you are beautiful." Me. Long pause. "Thanks." "Driver, what's your name?" Me. Long pause, and then I whisper my name. I realized that he could see it in the Uber app anyway. "Driver, what a hot name. I've always wanted to have sex with a girl named my name." Me. Total terrified silence. Driver, staring at me in the rearview mirror. He started talking and rambling without pause, but expecting clear responses and reactions from me. "Driver, do you have a boyfriend?" Me. Yes. "Driver, what a shame. I wanted you for myself." Me. Silence. Driver, but I don't mind the boyfriend. "Let's go somewhere else, come on. Change the address in the app, 'cause I can't. Only you can. I know a place where we can go be alone and smoke some weed." Me. "No, I can't. Take me to the address from the app." At this point I started to pay close attention to the route he was taking. I was so ready to jump out of the car if the situation had gotten really dangerous. Then he puts on a local rap song which I never heard before. The lyrics were very explicit, describing what the singer does to a girl during sex. Extremely explicit lyrics. "Driver, hear that? That's how having sex with me would be like. Oh yes, I would totally lick you like that and pull your hair until you can't even scream anymore. You will love it and come back begging for more." Me. Total silence. At this point I started messaging my ex and telling him what was happening. It was also a good excuse to not have to look at him or reply. "Driver, what do you think about that?" Me. Silence, texting my ex. Driver. Yelling. I asked, "What do you think about that?" My heart dropped. I froze. Me. Well, I haven't heard this song before. Driver, do you smoke weed? Me. No. Driver, smoke a joint with me. Me. No thank you. Driver, are you home alone? I could call it a night and go to your place and show you what I'm talking about. My heart was racing so bad at this point. I was so scared and shaking so hard. I was home alone, actually living alone. I decided to start recording him from here on and send the recording to my ex. Me. No, my parents are waiting for me. Driver, ugh, that sucks man. But we can stay in the car. I'll join you on the back seat. We'll find a spot where it's dark. Me. No, I need to go home, I'm tired. Driver. Common, I'll make you come 3 times in 10 minutes, trust me. Where did I put that weed? And he started searching for it. My ex listened to this part and called me. I was so relieved when I saw my phone ringing. I answered, and I made sure that the driver would hear that I'm on the phone with someone. He kept on talking, but I didn't hear much because he seemed to be upset about my phone call, and he was mostly talking to himself. My ex was furious, but told me to say out loud things like where I am, when I get home, as if he was asking me and I was answering, and other stuff like my mom texted me and is waiting for me, to say that I will call him when I get home, etc. I ended the phone call, and the driver asked me if that was my boyfriend. I said that it was. He kept silent for about 5 minutes, and I was so anxious to get home, We had like 5 more minutes before getting to my address. When he saw on the map that we were getting close, he started asking me again to go somewhere or stay in the car with him, to smoke with him, to tell him everything about me and my life, that he thinks he fell in love, to break up with my boyfriend. His speech was getting scarier, and he was getting more and more anxious that he couldn't convince me. He was turning to look at me, stop at green stops so he could turn to me. After what seemed like forever, and after shaking like a leaf, when we got in front of my building, I practically jumped out of the car while he was like, No, don't go. Where is your apartment? Let me come with you. I ran and entered the building. I had previously taken my keys out of my bag to open the intercom. I didn't turn on the light on the staircase because I didn't want him to see where in the block I live. It's a small block with 4 floors only. I stood there in darkness and peeked out the window to see if he was gone. He wasn't. He was looking at the block, probably waiting to see exactly where lights would turn on, aka where I live. I couldn't even enter my apartment because I had left the lights on in my hallway, and he would have seen that. I waited like 5 minutes, and he slowly left. I quickly entered my apartment and locked everything, but I did not turn on or off any lights, so it wouldn't seem like someone got home or something. I went to peek out the window to be sure that he indeed left, but surprise, he was back and parked this time. I was scared out of my mind. I know that many would say that I should have called the police, but in my country the police doesn't come for stuff like this. They barely show up in an hour if someone is being beaten or something. So he was there, just sitting there. Then I get a message from an unknown number telling me to come back down because he is waiting for me. I froze. I froze and cried at this point. It was like my life could completely change because of a 30 to 40 minutes ride with an unstable person. I didn't even know how could he take my number from the Uber app, or if he buzzed me when HR arrived to pick me up. I couldn't even remember. I didn't reply. He sent a few more messages. I remember that one in particular really creeped me out. He was asking me to at least smoke a cigarette with him on the phone, so he can hear me breathing and smoking. I texted back saying to leave me alone. He started calling, and I blocked the number. I was afraid that he could get so angry and try to get into the building and find me. I was looking out the window from behind a curtain, and I saw that after I blocked him, when he tried to call and couldn't, he started smashing his phone against the steering wheel. He finally left after 40 minutes or so of staying there. I remained keeping watch for another 2 hours or so. He didn't return. Thank God. The next day he messaged and called from another number, but I blocked that one as well. He tried once more 1 year later. I was so surprised, honestly. I blocked that number too and never heard from him again. I am also glad that I never saw him or his car again either, although right now I don't really remember how he looked like or what type of car he had. I reported everything to the Uber app, and I hope that they took measures. Honestly, I don't understand why nobody before me reported him. It didn't feel like it was the first time when he did this. It was somehow so easy for him. Ugh. One of the worst experiences ever. I'm a hunter. I like to hunt wild boar specifically. Though I have been deer hunting and have been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving, I mostly hunt boar. For those of you that don't know, boar are a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. I've been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that costs literally twice as much as the rifle I was mounting it on was worth it. But I did it. I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy-to-find spots that I could set up in that overlooked a large, easy-to-navigate clearing. The night started uneventful, mostly me tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I'd spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season, and like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. I moved to another spot I'd seen days earlier that probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. This spot doesn't have much animal activity at all, no rabbit or owls. The deer that I'd seen were hundreds of yards from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night, but lively in the day? I'd set up around 10 p.m., and it was about 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up, maybe setting up a target before I left and taking some practice shots. I heard a crunch come from the direction I came from before. I panned my scope over and saw the silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermal scope, kind of like a black and white version of what you see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little. I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear, it was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that a game warden? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming up the road from where I was perched. And where could he have walked from? I was 30 miles away from anything, and on public lands. I was about to call out when I adjusted my sights and noticed he was naked. No shoes, pants, or anything. I remember being disturbed by his movements, like a squirrel or something. Twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree. Was that my tree? The one I'd been leaning against earlier? The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Then he did something I still have nightmares about today. He squatted and placed his hands in the dirt between his feet and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it, a voice coming from that direction, a very compelling female voice. "Help! I'm lost." There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. It went against everything I'd been taught about firearms. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? "Help! Please! I can't walk!" The voice called out. That's when I called bullshit. Not only could he walk, when I first saw him he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person. So good I mistook him for a bear. That's a fucking trap. This guy is trying to lure me to him with a damsel in distress routine. Luckily the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and a sitting pad, but I didn't give a shit in that moment. I took my eyes off him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but his face was staring in my direction, and I swear I saw a smile. The thermal scope has an effect that makes animals' eyes appear white. How the hell had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He must have easily been 150 yards away. "Fuck off!" I screamed in that direction. He stood upright, and it hit me how tall and skinny he was. Easily 6 feet and very lean. He took a couple of long strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round sailing above his head into the tree-line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me. What would I tell the cops? I was unwilling and unready to shoot someone. He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. "The next one will fuck you up. Go away." He stayed on all fours, and this time I had my sights trained on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling and knew that my voice had cracked a little on that last warning. I was terrified. That standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant he bolted left towards the tree-line opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I could barely keep him in my scope, he was moving so fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another bullet sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck, and I wanted to get out of there. I could hear him in the distance, yelling in this weird sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab, but kept the rifle in the passenger seat and sped off. For the longest time I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone. Never received an update. It wasn't until I told this story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about wendigos, rakes, and skinwalkers. My story scared the piss out of him, because the spot we were camping was technically the same forest I'd seen the bastard. Just 50 miles east of it. He was so spooked his mom, my cousin, had to take him home. She was really pissed. I've gone down the rabbit hole one these scary stories. I'm not saying what I saw definitely was a wendigo or a skinwalker. I'm saying that if such a thing exists, I may have dodged quite the bullet that night. Or maybe it was just a tweaker being Donnie Thornberry in the middle of the night. Either way, thought I'd share. This experience happened to my roommates and I in our second year of university. The city we went to school in was considered a very safe university town. The most we had heard of happening was drunk morons doing typical drunk moron things. This was also the first time that we were all really living on our own. First-year residences are nice, but it's basically an extended summer camp rather than a typical living situation. The four of us girls lived in a nice townhouse that never once had a creepy vibe or weird neighbors in the months we had lived there. The only eerie part was that every weekend we were the only people who stayed in the complex. All of our neighbors either went home or stayed elsewhere until returning Monday for classes. This was never something we had given a second thought to, considering that was fairly normal for a uni town. Especially because our complex was only made up of about 4 other townhouses. The complex was surrounded by walking trails and farm fields, which we loved. It was like our quiet spot away from the chaos of college kids. There were a few farmhouses we could see from our backyard, but other than that we were fairly secluded. The university was about a 20-minute bus ride away, which was never a big deal for any of us, especially because the rent was far cheaper here than in places that were within walking distance to campus. Being 5 feet 6 inches, I was the tallest by a considerable amount. I was also the only one out of the group who had been in a handful of scary situations. Due to this, I was the only one up to this point who would lock the doors, windows, and garage before leaving or going to bed. My roommates all grew up in small, very safe towns, so it was uncommon for them to lock doors back at home. They were also incredibly kind and trusting to everyone, never considering hidden bad intentions. The night in question started very normally. We had planned on having a wine and movie night. This was kind of like a weekly tradition for us. We would pick out some stupid movie, get takeout, and get a little buzz after a long week of classes and work. At this point, it was early November, so we had been doing this for several months with no issues. By 8:30-ish we had all settled on the couch in our living room and had started a comedy. With it being November, it was already completely dark outside. Other than our porch light we could see from the small window at the very top of our door. None of us were tall enough to see anything out of that window anyway, so we relied entirely on our peephole. It took a great amount of effort for me to convince my roommates to check the peephole before opening the door. This was a talk we had after one roommate had opened the door for our neighbor's very drunk friend, who threw up all over our main floor. Not long after ordering our takeout, we heard banging on our front door. Jess made a joke about how the delivery guy must have taken a helicopter to get here this quickly, especially considering the place we ordered from was very close to campus. It was not a typical delivery guy's knock either, but between the few glasses of wine and carefree attitude of the night, we didn't really pay it too much mind. It was my roommate's turn to pay this week. I'll call her Meg for the sake of the story. Out of the group, she is the smallest, barely 5 feet 0 inches. She is also the most trusting person I think I have ever met. She ran up to her room to grab her wallet. This took at most 30 seconds. During this time the banging continued and was getting more aggressive. I figured maybe it was cold or he had other shit to do, so we yelled up to get her to hurry. The banging continued to get harder and harder, and I started to feel a bit uneasy. When she came back down I told her to check the peephole before opening it, as she was usually the one to just open up. She got to the door and looked out the peephole. She could barely reach it on a good day, so when she said she couldn't see anything, my other roommate and I got up to help. My second roommate, I'll call her Jess, is a very funny person. There are very few things that she would not turn into a joke. Jess got to the door before I did and looked out of the peephole. The person on the other side still banging away. When she turned to look at me I knew something was wrong. She looked incredibly confused, a look I had rarely seen from her as she was very clever. Within a second, she had gone back in for another look. This time her face was not confused, she looked afraid. This made my stomach knot up. She is a horror movie fanatic, and she doesn't scare easily. I think someone is covering the peephole, she whisper-shouted at us. This time I looked out of the peephole, seeing that something was covering the peephole. We could still the porch light shining through the window at the top, so we knew it was not a case of it being too dark to be able to see what was going on. By now our other roommate, whom I'll call, and had walked down the hall trying to find out what was going on. She was easily the drunkest of the 4 of us. Even sober though, she seemed to think she was invincible. "What is your problem? Open the door." "The poor dude has his hands full," was Anne's wise idea. Jess and I explained what was going on. At this point Meg, Jess, and I all had a gut feeling that something was wrong. That is, when Jess asked Meg to check the website she had ordered our food on. Meg had not placed the order. Between the wine and the silliness of the earlier night, she had selected our food, but did not finish the last step. The banging continued as our situation started to sink in, and still did not seem to grasp what was happening, and tried to unlock the door. "Stop," I snapped at her. Immediately I knew it was too loud. For the first time, the person on the other side of the door spoke. "This is the police. Open the door now. We have a few questions to ask you," a man's voice practically growled back at us. This sobered me up right away. I looked over at Meg, who was already welling up, then at Jess, who had gone completely pale. At this point, and also realized something was not right and froze, which is the least and thing she could have done. The banging was getting increasingly harder, to the point we could physically see the door breathe with each hit. Meg took in upstairs, trying to calm each other down, and check if there was a police car parked outside, and make sure our windows were locked. Though it was hard to do, it was possible to get onto part of our roof that made it possible to get to Anne's window. We heard a window slam, immediately knowing that it had been Anne's window. Being a bit of a thrill seeker, and had taken out her window screen in order to sit on the roof. For some reason, this made what was happening very real. "Show me your badge, then we'll open the door," I yelled back. Instead of a response, it sounded like the guy started to kick the door. I told Jess to call the police and ask if they had an officer dispatched to our address. Jess was shaking so badly at this point that it was hard for her to dial. Now Meg had come back down the stairs, sharing that there was no police car parked outside, and trailed behind her, standing on the stair landing, trying to get a look outside the window at the top of the door. At that moment my blood ran cold, remembering that the man at the door had said "we" and not "I." Jess had just come to the same realization. She sprinted to our back door, a large sliding glass door, which she double-checked that it was locked. Thankfully it had been. She drew the curtains as well, trying to minimize the chance of them seeing in. Within a minute, the knocking started at our back door as well. Thank God she had closed the curtains, because the idea of seeing whoever was doing that still gives me chills. "Uncover the peephole and show me your badge," I yelled again, trying to sound as intimidating as a young college girl could. We were met with silence, which was so much worse than the banging. "What is your badge number at least? Prove to us that you are the police," I screamed, trying to keep my voice from breaking. The only response I got back was a gravelly, "I can't do that." Jess had handed her phone off to Meg, who was sobbing now, trying to speak to the dispatcher. The banging now, coming from both sides of the house, must have been heard by the operator. "Is there someone trying to break in?" she asked Meg, obviously being unable to understand her. Meg frantically asked if police had been sent to our house. The answer we all knew by now was no. Meg babbled that at least 2 men tried to get us to unlock the door by impersonating a police officer. "Try to stay calm. Stay on the phone with me. Police are on their way to your address," the operator told Meg. "How long will they be?" Meg asked back. "No more than 10 minutes, she responded. That made Meg cry harder, realizing just how long 10 minutes really is. The door was being hit so hard I worried it would break. Jess ran back toward our back door, making me worry that our kitchen window had been open. Trying to think, I put a chair under the doorknob and sat down, hoping the door would hold. Jess came back to the front door, holding a kitchen knife and a fire extinguisher, which were the only things we had to protect ourselves with in case they got in. And now sitting on the landing, flinched with each hit, and was farm tough and had no issue dealing with animals 3 times her size. What was happening now, though, was entirely different. We had nothing to really deter whoever wanted in. No prods and no backup until the real police show up. Not like what she was used to. She grew up having family as her neighbors her whole life. If anything were happening, her uncles and grandfather were at her front door in a minute flat. Anne's "I'm invincible" attitude was long gone. She was now as scared as the rest of us, only having some wood and glass keeping these men out. Each hit to the back door made me expect whoever was there to break through the glass. "Open the fucking door," the man yelled at us, not caring if we thought they were police anymore. Then it got very quiet again, which made me want to throw up. The only thing worse than what was happening was not knowing where the men were. The idea of both men moving to the back door made me absolutely terrified. If they really wanted to, it would very little effort to smash through the plate glass. Instead, the knocking at the back door had completely ceased. Within seconds of that, the front door started being hit again. Trying to wrap my mind around why they would leave the easiest entry for a heavy wood. I realized the back door was visible to the main road. Whether they had seen a car or heard us talking to the police, they were smart enough to not want to be seen by anyone. Jess then said something that I had not thought of. "I don't think they want to rob us. There are so many houses that are empty. Why would they come to the only house with the lights on?" she hissed. My whole body went cold. I did not have an answer. All I could say was, "Fuck, you're right." Meg clearly felt the same, because at this point she was practically hyperventilating. The three of us stayed quiet for a minute, awful scenarios running through our heads, and moved back up the last few steps and out of sight of us. The operator, who we had forgotten was on speaker, spoke, which practically made me jump out of my skin. She must have felt how terrified we were, and tried to calm us down. "The police are 2 minutes away, they have their sirens turned off, and the lights are on. You should be able to see them very soon. Stay on the phone with me, so I can confirm when they are outside for you," she said. The men outside were starting to seem desperate. The sound of glass shattering had me turning to the back door, fully expecting to go into a fence, but the door was still intact. Instead, our porch light, the only light illuminating our dark street, went out, which put 2 and 2 together for me, understanding that they had destroyed the only way we would have been able to identify whoever was on the other side. "Fuck you little whores," a voice we hadn't heard before, whoever was at the back door spat. This was worse than the initial speaker. It was full of so much hate and venom that it scared me more than the banging. He was so calm, intent on whatever his goal was. It didn't feel like how the first man had sounded. Up until this point, I could have convinced myself that they had wanted our valuables, but this voice made me understand that he had wanted us. To this day, I have never heard a voice come close to that level of malice. It sounded like he wanted to inflict serious harm on us, and if he had gained entry, I know he would have. Somehow I wanted the first man to speak again, instead of whichever sick bastard had just spoken. I looked at Meg. I know how terrified I must have looked. Until now, I may have done a half-decent job at hiding how scared I was, but that voice ruined my ability to stay stone-faced. Meg looked like a scared little girl, and that made me panic. If they got in, there is nothing I would be able to do to stop them. Not for me, and not for my friends. We would have been at the mercy of the monster outside. Jess had practically stopped breathing. It was like the oxygen had been sucked out of the air. It was so quiet it sounded like a gunshot when our mailbox opened, and ran back down the stairs. "I see the sirens. They're coming down the main road now," she whispered, hoping not to have the men hear. The same man spoke again one more time so slowly that I almost thought he was done after each word. In that same awful, calm voice he read out a letter addressed to the 4 of us. Our neighbor must have put it in today. She had planned a potluck for the next week. None of us thought to check the mailbox after we had talked to her in the driveway this morning. Jess, Meg, and Opie. Those are nice names. "I'll be back soon, girls. Then we'll have some fun." I felt tears rolling down my face. I hadn't realized I had started crying, but I knew he meant what he had said. I tried to pull my mind out of the dark pit that sentence had sent it to, waiting, praying that the police had surprised them, hoping they would not get the chance to come back. The silence continued. None of us dared to speak, worried that we would not hear if they moved to another point of entry. Instead, the silence persisted for what felt like a lifetime. The operator was the first one to speak again, telling us that the police are out front. She told us to stay in the house until the police knocked on the door. The kind woman stayed on the phone with us for several more minutes while the police searched around the area. Finally, the real police showed their badge to the peephole before even knocking to try not to scare us. The operator told us that we had done well and that we were in good hands now. We opened the door to be met by 2 kind-looking, older police officers who we let in. Glass shards covered our front stoop from our porch light. It looked like it had been ripped out of the wall and smashed onto the concrete below. There were several police cars out front of our previously quiet home. The headlights on all of the cars were shining down the street towards the walking trail. We spoke to the officers who took a report from us. They asked us to describe the night's events in detail. They asked us if we saw them at all, and we explained how the peephole had been covered and the light had been smashed before moving away from the door. The officers advised us to speak to our landlord about at the very least security cameras. The older officer then closed the pad he had been writing in and looked up at us. He then spoke a phrase that made me understand how much danger we had been in. "Look, if any of you were my daughters, I would have wanted the officer to tell her. If you can get out of your lease, do it. They know where you all live, and they also know the response time for us. Especially after telling you all that he would be back." After that, they asked if we had heard a vehicle. That was something I had not considered. We did not hear any type of motor until the police were there. Even when Meg and had one to look for a police car, they saw no cars on the street at all. So likely that meant they had come from the walking path, which would explain how they left without passing the police on their way back to the main road. The older officer of the 2, had a look that told me he had an idea of what was going on. He looked sad, which was worse than if he had looked scared. I knew he had seen this situation, and far worse in the past. We pushed for an explanation, but were only told that this had been an issue years ago, but did not elaborate past that point. The officers stood up, exchanged a glance that I did not know how to read, and then spoke again. We will have a cruiser parked in the driveway, as well as a plain car around the back. They will not have a chance to try again. They did not catch the men in the 2 more weeks we lived there. We had a few creepy things, but nothing close to this. The reality was they had not been caught, and they could come back anytime. After this night, we spoke to our landlady, who was incredible. She owned several properties around the city, and when we explained what had happened, she let us move to an apartment closer to campus. She told us that our safety is more important than making a few $100s. She even left the house empty for many months in order to make sure cameras, better locks, and a reinforced back door. Thankfully, they did not come back, and we were able to enjoy our new apartment without worrying. This is still so scary to me because of that voice. Make sure you lock doors and check who's there before opening the door. Often, I enjoy walking my dog at night time. This is due to the fact that my dog is harder to walk when people are around with their own dogs. So, we tend to walk around parks in the area when they've become somewhat secluded. I'm not a very big guy. I'm just about 5 feet 10 inches and very lanky, so I wouldn't call myself an intimidating figure. However, my 120-pound black boxer/lab, named Loki, could be somewhat considered threatening to most from what I hear. I figured his size would be used as a deterrent for anyone looking to cause nightly troubles. I was dead wrong. On one specific night in the fall of 2016, I could recall of an encounter that reminds me of why I am so reluctant to walk around once daylight falls. This specific park is one I have been to a couple times, and from what I remember, this park is usually secluded around 6:30 and later. Aside from a couple of joggers or very few other dog walkers, not many people walk the same path I take. I also like to put on my headphones and listen to music while I walk. But on this specific night, I chose not to wear them since my phone was on low battery, and I wanted to preserve it as long as I could. Anyway, the walk was going as usual. Loki did his business, and we continued on our usual path. About midway on our walk, I realized that it had started to get really dark. Since he was done with his business, I decided to cut the walk somewhat short, and we took a short cut that kind of led us off the path. This path had a bunch of trees surrounding the area, and there were still leaves on the branches. With that being said, I felt a weird feeling, as if I were being watched. I have pretty bad anxiety sometimes, but since I knew the town was safe, I knew that nothing was going to happen. But still, I could not for the life of me shake off the feeling of being watched. I peered back to see if anyone had been following me out of anxiety, and every single time no one was there. In fact, no one was anywhere. This whole short cut was essentially secluded. Suddenly, Loki stopped walking, and also looked back. I told him, "Loki, come on boy, we've got to go." One thing I failed to mention was that Loki is a big coward. I noticed his tail was tucked between his legs, which is a telltale sign that a dog is afraid. I was also curious and a bit nervous, but I surely did not want to find out what he heard or noticed. I just wanted to get out ASAP. I pulled a little, and he began to walk, but every now and then I'd see him peer back. After maybe a minute or so of walking, he stopped again, and this time he began to growl. Despite being a coward, Loki is a bark but no bite kind of dog. So, I took this chance to see exactly what he was growling at. It was quite dark, so I could not see well. So, I used my phone's flashlight to see what was up. Trees, just trees. What he heard was probably some kind of small animal. Once again, I turned around and kept walking. He continued to peer back once and a while still, but this time I noticed it was a lot more frequent. I just said to myself, just squirrels, maybe a bird, and I ignored it. Then, I heard what appeared to be actual footsteps and branches breaking. There is absolutely no way a small animal could have produced a sound like that. Loki turned around quick, and still with his tail tucked, he began to growl and bark at a figure that I could only describe as a man in his early 50s, possibly late 40s, appear from out of the woods. He was dressed in dirty clothing, his hair was long and was graying, he had one hand in his pocket, and he said to me, "Nice dog you have there, kid. What breed is he?" "He's a boxer/lab," I replied. "Oh, I love dogs, mind if I pet him?" he wondered. The man got closer and emerged from the trees. As he got closer, I realized that he was quite tall and a bit burly. Loki instantly got bad vibes. He ran behind me and started to bark at him. Actually, I do kinda mind. My dog here doesn't like strangers. Sorry, but it's probably not best if you pet him, I quickly stated. It's okay, really. He seems like a friendly guy. Just a little pet wouldn't harm him, the man retorted as he got closer. I felt extremely uncomfortable, as he appeared to get closer and closer. I don't know why this guy couldn't take no for an answer. I mean, I usually don't allow people to pet Loki unless he comes up to them first. If he's scared of you, then I usually do not want to freak him out by letting him be pet by a stranger. This is especially the case when said stranger came from the woods behind a few trees. I'm really sorry, man. I'm scared he'd bite you or something, I told him as I began to walk away. Like I said before, I wasn't trying to be judgmental or anything, but the dude came from the woods and was possibly the one trailing us from before. I don't know why you won't just let me introduce myself to him, the guy replied angrily. This time I began to speed walk. I was very uncomfortable, and my flight or fight instincts began to take over. He followed us and kept muttering curses to himself. I don't know if this man was under the influence of something, but he did not let up. I won't lie, I started to get a little angry. Why can't a guy just take no for an answer? He began to match my speed, almost as if he was trying to catch up to us. Loki and I both took this as an answer to start sprinting a bit. I don't remember much of the running, it was all a blur to me. But I do remember the spine-tingling feeling of hearing his footsteps rapidly increasing behind me. For a man of his stature, he was quite fast. I also realized that his intentions may not have just been to pet my dog. No one reasonable would go that far just to pet a dog that clearly wanted nothing to do with him. I looked behind me, and he was in pursuit. Maybe about 10 feet behind me he was chasing us. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. I've never had anyone look at me like that, a look of killer intent. All for what? Just because he couldn't pet my dog? My instincts told me that he definitely had sinister intent behind that. Finally, the path led to the park exit and into the busier streets. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park. I made sure no one was following me, and I even made sure to walk on the populated streets. After what seemed like an eternity, we got home, but I knew for a fact that I was not going to get a minute of sleep. From my window in the porch, I watched all night with Loki, just to see if anyone had followed us home. I also made a police report with my parents. After all, this guy seemed to have been quite suspicious, and who knows what his true intentions were. Had his target been someone who couldn't protect themselves or run away, what would he have done? I also often ask myself, what if I had worn my headphones and the sound of music drowned the footsteps behind me? Ever since, I haven't walked Loki in that park. I've also made it a habit of mine to walk on livelier streets at night. If I could give anyone one piece of advice, even if you live in a relatively safe town, do not ever let your guard down. You never know what kind of person might be lurking in the shadows. I had just moved in with my boyfriend at the time. He was living in this weird little house that was down by itself next to an asphalt plant and railroad tracks. But it was nice and quiet after living on / near the college campus nearby for years. To get to it, you turned off the main road and drove down this spiral hill until you got to the lonely little house by itself. There was a little parking lot behind the house, so we always parked there and used the back door. No one ever came to the front door because you'd have to park on the street and walk through the lawn to get to it. It just didn't make sense to use it. This particular night, I was home alone while the BF was at work. I decided to start watching a particular USA Scary Tales show. I think it had just started that year or the year before, so the hype was crazy. For anyone familiar with the first season, you may remember that there's an episode pretty early on where a scary guy is banging on the front door of this house, and it's pretty creepy. Enter the creepy encounter. I had just watched the aforementioned scene and was creeped out because I was home alone at night watching a scary show. All of a sudden someone starts knocking on my front door. As I mentioned before, no one ever used the front door, so I was creeped out right away. I had the blinds closed, but the door was one of those old-style ones with 3 little windows in it, so there was no way for me to look to see who it was without them very clearly seeing me too. So I cracked the door open, and it's an older / middle-aged guy with a male in his teens behind him. They were both covered in blood and dirt. Older man says they were out hunting, and their truck got stuck in the mud, and they couldn't get it out. Their phones were dead, and they needed to use mine to call someone to help them. Now I'm not a hunter, but our house was technically within city limits, and I was pretty sure the season opener was coming up soon, but hadn't happened yet. However, I'm from MN, so we're often nice / helpful to a fault. So of course I'm scared out of my mind, but slipped them my cell phone through the crack in the door. They use it and make a few calls, which I can't really hear because I kept the glass/screen door closed throughout most of this encounter. No one answers their calls at first, so they hand the phone back to me, but keep standing on my stoop waiting to see if they call back. At this point, I'm frantically texting my BF what's happening, and he's asking for photos of me to make sure I'm still alive. Finally, the creepy hunter dude's people call back, so I hand the phone over again, talk to their people, then hang up and give me the phone back and leave. I immediately bolted the front and back doors and ran into the kitchen to get the biggest knife we owned. Proceeded to sit on the couch shaking in silence for the next little while. Time was standing still from my fear, so I don't know how long I was sitting there, but after a bit I see lights streaming through the little door windows. Their truck was pointing straight at the front of my house with their headlights flooding it. They come back up to the front door and knock again. I hide the knife behind my back and crack it open again, and they tell me they got the truck out and need my phone one more time to call off their people. They're finally about to leave and ask if they can come back with a 6-pack sometime to thank me. I noped the hell out of that situation and, probably not so nicely, asked them to never come back. Boyfriend got home shortly after they left. We called the non-emergency line to report it and ask about hunting season. Apparently bow hunting was open at the time, so I guess that could explain the blood, but not the location. Still the absolute scariest experience I've ever had. Never wanted to move out of a house quicker than after that night. My best friend and I, both F and 16 to 17 at the time, went to the mall near her house and were walking around the normal stores we would check out. We saw a cute guy, M18-19, but didn't know how to approach him since we are social outcasts. He must have noticed because he came to talk to us. After a month or so I start dating him for about 5 months or so and am introduced to pot and mushrooms. A few weeks to a month into the relationship, he tells me about a girlfriend he had back in Tennessee that cheated on him when he moved down south. He told me he knew the Mexican mafia and in great detail how he wanted to kidnap both his ex, the guy she cheated on him with, and their families and slowly torture and kill them. I thought he was joking until he got into the lengthy details of injecting acid into veins, violent beatings, and body disposal. My parents picked me up after that, and, not telling them what I learned, I silently cried in the back of the car. He shows me his sword and knife collection shortly before I join a D&D group that's hosted at a store in the mall I live next to. After I join, he becomes very upset and jealous, and went as far as showing up during a session I was not present for and threatened them with some of his knives. I, of course, apologized to my group since I knew every one of them from my friend group at school. Not much later, he thinks I'm pregnant and shows me a case from the FBI that included black gloves with weighted knuckles, just in case he needed a forced miscarriage by beating me. I went to my best friend's house, since she lived just down the street. Her entire household of maybe 12 or so was waiting for me outside, and her step-brothers had guns at the ready. We talked him down, and he just took me to get the morning after pill. I don't remember what caused this, but at some point I sent him a lengthy message of him sorry, and he made me bow to him the next time I saw him and say it as many times as I wrote it. He also threw something I gave him in the street and kept running after it, picking it up, running back to me just to throw it again. I used to take the light rail every weekend to see him, since it was right next to my school and ended right down the street from him. He once fell asleep while I was riding it and wouldn't answer his home or cell phone. I had to walk like 2 or 3 miles in the Arizona sun during midsummer to get to him, since he was closer than my friend. After that I started going to his house less and hanging out with my friends closer to home. He called me one day while I was hanging out with someone who shared the name of one of my D&D mates and blew up. We basically ended the relationship over the phone, and I hung up on him. I refused to answer his calls as well since I didn't have to deal with any immediate repercussions. He wound up apologizing and attempted to win me back. I refused, and he started threatening driving into my house. I don't remember having any physical or even visual interactions with him since then. I don't think I would have been able to leave him if we didn't have an issue over the phone. I'm terrified of what would have happened if I managed to try to break up with him in person. Or worse, if we had gotten married. He mentioned while trying to win me back that he was going to ask me to marry him. I had another POS boyfriend a few years later for about a year, and it caused additional mental trauma. I don't want to go into that much detail really, but he would make me watch him punch himself in the head or bang his head against the wall. It was as if he was punishing someone else with how much he put into it. Both of these men could have easily done something terribly worse if the relationships had not ended. I refused to date anyone for about 5 years after this last relationship. I wanted someone who connected with me and didn't change after we started getting physical. My boyfriend of the last 2.5 years is aware of some of these details and is very understanding as to why I shut down during certain situations. He's been trying to help me open up to him since I only ever had one other normal relationship and hadn't had another person care for my feelings and opinions for a long time. He can tell when something's wrong and will keep asking me until I tell him, since he knows I still shut down but want to open up to him. In the time I have been with him, I have found myself crying with him beside me because I can't believe I've found someone so sweet to me. It happened quite often at first, the crying that is, but has since slowed down. Still happens though since he's been with me through so much. I just remembered this the other day while talking with my friend, but my ex once threatened to shit himself because we were at Glendale Lights or something similar and there was country playing. I told him to deal with it because I was originally going with just my friend and he wanted to tag along. No shitting occurred, but GD, I would have loved it. He had a car that he could remove the keys while driving, and he did this constantly to make passengers nervous.